The laughter was the first clue, the first crack in the facade of my meticulously constructed reality. It wasn't the usual mockery I'd grown accustomed to, almost immunized against, in my 94 days inside the belly of Blackwood Federal Penitentiary. It wasn't the hollow, desperate jeers of men with nothing but shattered pasts and endless time, men who spat insults like sunflower seeds just to feel the shape of words in their mouths. No, this was different. This was a sound that carried weight, a texture that was both rich and sharp. This was the laughter of men who believed, with every fiber of their being, that they had already won. It was the sound of a punchline delivered, a secret shared, a trap sprung. They knew something. I could feel it not just as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the perpetual chill emanating from the monolithic concrete walls. It was a deep, internal tremor, a signal from a primal part of my brain that the landscape had shifted beneath my feet. And in that moment, as I pressed myself into the shadows of a utility alcove, hiding from the very officers I was theoretically supposed to trust, their heavy, rhythmic bootfalls echoing down the long, sterile hall like the ticking of a doomsday clock, I realized the horrifying truth. My cover, the identity I had worn like a second skin, wasn't just blown. It was a carefully designed instrument in a symphony of my own destruction. It was a trap. And the man holding the key, the one orchestrating the entire performance, the one I had called partner for 94 agonizingly long days, was the very architect who had set me up. It all started on a Tuesday, a day as unremarkable as any other. The kind of gray, forgettable morning that seems purpose-built for places like Blackwood, where the sky is just a flat, indifferent lid on a box of despair. The official story, the one meticulously entered into the Bureau of Prison System, was that I was Officer Carter. A transfer from a state facility out west, a man with a decent but unremarkable record, looking to climb the ladder, to prove himself in the high-stakes environment of the federal system. The truth. I was a ghost, an undercover agent from a specialized unit, dispatched on a very specific, very quiet mission. Find the source of a contraband pipeline that was systematically turning Blackwood from a maximum security prison into a ticking powder keg. For 3 long years, a seemingly endless river of high-grade narcotics, untraceable communication devices, and even weapons had been flowing into the prison with the baffling precision of a Swiss watch. Every past investigation, every attempt to dam the flow, had shattered against the prison's impenetrable culture of silence, a wall built of fear and misguided loyalty known as the Convict Code. So, the agency, in its infinite wisdom, decided to stop knocking on the wall and instead send someone to dissolve it from the inside. They sent me. My preparation was an exercise in systematic dehumanization. The training was grueling, an ordeal designed to strip away every reactive instinct and replace it with cold, calculated observation. It was weeks upon weeks spent not just memorizing the labyrinthine Bureau of Prisons rulebook, but absorbing the unwritten, and far more important, laws of the yard. I learned a new way to walk, a new way to talk, a new way to simply stand. The lessons were burned into my psyche. Don't show weakness, but never project aggression, for it will be interpreted as a challenge. Be firm, be fair, and above all, be relentlessly consistent. Inmates, I was taught, are scholars of human behavior with a singular subject of study, the guards. My job was to become the most boring, predictable book on the shelf, so flawlessly mundane that I would eventually cease to be seen at all. I was to become a ghost in plain sight. On that first day, the towering concrete walls of Blackwood didn't just touch the sky. They seemed to consume it, to devour the light and leave only a grim, oppressive shadow in its place. As the main gate, a monstrous slab of groaning steel, slid shut behind me, the sound didn't just echo, it resonated with a grim finality, a percussive declaration that the world outside had ceased to exist. I was met there by Captain Davis, a man whose face was a roadmap of 20 years spent navigating this pressure cooker. His skin was tight, his eyes were perpetually narrowed, and the lines around his mouth were carved by a million unheard sighs. "Carter," he grunted, his handshake firm but so quick it was almost an afterthought. "Welcome to the circus. Don't get eaten by the lions. Your partner's Miller. He'll show you the ropes." And then I saw him, and the contrast was so stark it was almost comical. Leaning against a graffiti-scarred wall, the complete antithesis of the rigid, suffocating formality of the prison, was Officer David Miller. He was relaxed, a slight, easy smile playing on his lips as if he were waiting for a friend at a local bar, not starting a shift in a human cage. He had an effortless charm that seemed to instantly lower the temperature of any room, a disarming quality that was both a comfort and, as I would later learn, a weapon. He was a big man, not in the sculpted, artificial way of a gym rat, but with the solid, grounded presence of a former high school football star who had settled comfortably into his frame. "New blood," Miller said, his voice a warm baritone as he pushed off the wall and extended a hand. His grip was strong, his smile so genuine it felt like a beacon in the gloom. "Dave Miller. It's good to have you. And don't listen to the captain, it's not a circus. It's more like a really, really dysfunctional family. And we're the dads who have to set the curfew. In the feds, especially in a high-security pen like Blackwood, your partner is more than just a colleague. He's your lifeline. He's the one who has your back when a cell extraction spirals into a riot, the one who covers you during a shakedown so you don't get a shiv in the ribs, the one who can read your intent from a simple glance across a crowded chow hall." Miller immediately, and with seemingly boundless generosity, took me under his wing. He didn't just show me the ropes. He wove them into a comprehensive tapestry of survival. He walked me through the relentless, soul-crushing daily grind, the jarring 6 a.m. wake-up call, the tense precision of the morning count where every soul must be accounted for, the controlled chaos of chow time, a symphony of clattering trays and simmering aggression. Remarkably, he seemed to know every inmate's name, their story, their angle, their hustle. "See that one?" he'd murmur, his voice low as he nodded towards an older inmate reading quietly in a secluded corner of the yard, a man who seemed almost serene amidst the bedlam. "That's Silas. Been in here 25 years for a triple homicide he still claims he didn't commit. He sees everything. Knows more about the state of this place than the warden himself. He's a good barometer. If Silas is calm, the block is calm. If you see him getting twitchy, you better be on your guard." Miller didn't just teach me the official layout of the prison. He taught me its real geography, the one that existed in the shadows and whispers. He pointed out the blind spots in the security cameras on C-Block, a dead zone just wide enough for a hand-to-hand exchange. He showed me the loose floor tile in the laundry room that hid a small cavity for stashing contraband. He explained how the acoustics of the mess hall, a design flaw in its vaulted ceiling, could carry a whisper from a table at one end to a listener at the other. He was a fountain of institutional knowledge, and he shared it with the easy generosity of a seasoned mentor. "You gotta be fair with these guys, Carter," he told me during one long, dragging evening shift, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and regret. "They're convicts, sure, but they're not animals. They respect a firm hand, but they respect a fair one more. You give an inch, they'll take a mile, a state, a whole damn continent. But if you're a man of your word, if they know your no means no, and your yes means yes, they learn the boundaries. It's the only way to maintain order." It was advice straight from the academy textbook, a line I had heard 100 times during my training. But coming from him, delivered with that earnest, world-weary conviction, it felt authentic. He seemed to possess a genuine, almost unbelievable rapport with the inmate population. They would joke with him, they would complain to him about their sentences and their cellmates, but when he gave an order, they almost always complied. He was, by all accounts, the perfect correctional officer. The kind of partner you thank your lucky stars for, a steady hand in a world of chaos. And for weeks I did. I trusted him completely. We'd spend long hours sharing stories about our lives on the outside, complaining about the endless bureaucracy and paperwork, and watching each other's backs with the unspoken pact of brothers in arms. He was my anchor in that swirling vortex of hostility. The taunts from the inmates, of course, started on day one. It's a standard, almost ritualistic test for any new face in uniform. They call you new fish, they whistle when you walk by, they make crude, cutting comments just loud enough to be heard but deniable enough to avoid a write-up. It's a psychological game, a constant low-grade assault designed to chip away at your authority until it crumbles. My training had prepared me for it. The mantra was simple: ignore it. Show no reaction. Be a stone wall, and eventually, they will tire of throwing pebbles at it. And it worked. After a few weeks of stoic indifference, the taunts just faded into the background noise of the prison, like the hum of the ventilation system. But the laughter, that was different. It happened about 3 months into my assignment, a night that is seared into my memory. We were conducting the 10 p.m. count on D Block, the high-security segregation unit. This was where they housed the most dangerous, the most disciplined, the most volatile inmates in the entire facility. Miller and I were walking the tier, a narrow catwalk that ran in front of 24 solid steel doors. The protocol is brutally simple. Look through the small, thick window in the door, see living flesh, mark it down on the clipboard, and move on. I stopped at cell D13. The occupant was Silas, the prison's barometer, who'd been sent to Seg for a week after a yard altercation. He wasn't sleeping. He was just sitting on his bunk, perfectly still, watching me with an unnerving placidity. As my gaze met his through the thick, scratch-resistant plexiglass, a slow, knowing smile spread across his weathered face. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was a smile of profound, secret amusement. Then, he chuckled. It was a low, deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the very steel of the door. It was impossibly infectious. A few cells down, I heard a short, sharp laugh from a notorious gang leader named Rico. Then another, from a different cell. Within seconds, the entire block, all 24 men locked in solitary cells, was filled with it. It wasn't the sound of shouting or banging or a typical prison disturbance. It was just laughter. Coordinated. Confident. It echoed off the concrete and steel, a swelling chorus of unified mockery aimed directly and unmistakably at me. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck, an involuntary tightening in my stomach. My training screamed at me to maintain my composure, to show no reaction, but my gut was churning with a violent sense of wrongness. This wasn't random. This wasn't a prank. It was a message. I risked a glance at Miller. He was standing a few feet away, his back to me, acting completely unfazed as he made a note on his own clipboard. "Just ignore him, Carter," he said, his voice casual, not even bothering to turn around. "They're just trying to get a rise out of you. Seg psychosis. Happens all the time. But it didn't. Not like this. Not with this precision, this unity. This was organized. The laughter was a shared secret, a collective joke, and I was the punchline." As we finished the count and the heavy, electronically controlled door of the block clanged shut behind us, the sound of laughter was suddenly, sharply cut off, replaced by an eerie, profound silence that was somehow more unnerving. Walking back to the central control room, my mind was a maelstrom of frantic calculations. What did they know? My cover was deep, layered with falsified records and a believable backstory. The only person on the entire planet who knew my real identity was my handler, a man I communicated with through encrypted channels. The leak, therefore, had to be internal. It was the only logical, terrifying explanation. The list of potential traitors was horrifyingly long. It could be any of the 100+ officers who walked these halls. It could be someone in the administrative staff with access to personnel files. It could, in a worst-case scenario, even be the warden himself. But that laughter, it felt intensely personal. They weren't laughing at a generic corrections officer. They were laughing at me, the undercover federal agent who thought he was so clever. They knew. And as I stood there, looking at the duty roster for the night, a sickening, venomous thought began to form in the back of my mind, a thought I desperately tried to push away because its implications were too catastrophic to consider. I replayed the scene in my head 1,000 times. Miller's impossibly casual dismissal. His back being turned to me at the exact moment the laughter peaked. His perfect advice, his easy charm, his encyclopedic knowledge of the prison's every secret. He seemed like the model officer, the gold standard. But in a world built on lies and deception, perfection is often just the most convincing mask. What if his vast knowledge didn't come from being a good observer, but from being an active participant? The thought was poison, corroding the very foundation of my mission. Betrayal from a partner is the ultimate sin in law enforcement. It undermines the absolute trust that keeps you alive in a hostile world. That night, lying awake in my sterile, anonymous off-base apartment, the sound of that synchronized laughter still ringing in my ears like a phantom tinnitus, I knew with chilling certainty that my mission had completely and irrevocably changed. This wasn't just about finding a contraband route anymore. This was about survival. I was a lone agent, adrift in a sea of enemies, and the one person I was supposed to trust with my life might be the very one setting me up to lose it. The days that followed the laughter incident were a grueling masterclass in high-stakes paranoia. Every casual conversation, every shared look across the yard, every routine procedure was now filtered through a lens of suspicion, potentially laden with hidden meaning and threat. I was walking a razor's edge, acutely aware that one misstep could send me plunging into an abyss. And right there beside me, every step of the way, was Miller, smiling his easy, disarming smile, completely oblivious, it seemed, to the raging storm inside my head. Or so he masterfully wanted me to believe. My first move, therefore, was to pivot my entire operation. I became a student of David Miller, treating him as my primary and sole target. The behavioral analysis training that had been drilled into me at the agency kicked into high gear, and I began to compile a meticulous mental log of his every action, searching for the telltale cracks in his perfect facade. Miller always took his coffee black, a habit he joked about being the only pure thing in his life. One morning, I watched him stir 2 sugars into his cup when he thought no one was looking. A minor detail, a triviality to anyone else, but it was a change, a deviation from a rigidly established pattern. He always parked his beat-up Ford truck in the 3rd spot from the end in the staff lot. Twice in 1 week, he parked in the distant overflow lot, a longer walk for no apparent reason. Another change. On their own, these were tiny, almost meaningless anomalies, the kind of things a person wouldn't even notice about themselves. But in my world, patterns are everything. A break in the pattern is a signal flare, an arrow pointing to an underlying stressor or a hidden activity. He started using a new, more expensive brand of chewing tobacco, a small luxury that seemed at odds with his constant complaints about his salary. His phone, which by regulation should have been secured in his locker during a shift, was now perpetually on his person. He began taking hushed, urgent calls in a cramped supply closet, his back to the door. When I happened upon him once and asked if everything was okay, he waved it off with his typical charm. Just the wife, nagging about the leaky faucet again. You know how it is. But his face was tight, his eyes weren't smiling, and they were constantly scanning the hall behind me. The psychological toll of this dual reality was brutal. I had to maintain the character of Officer Carter, the friendly, slightly green transfer who looked up to his seasoned partner. I had to laugh at Miller's jokes, ask for his advice on handling a difficult inmate, and share a commiserating sigh about the overtime schedule, all while a frantic, screaming voice in my head screamed that this man was a viper, coiling himself around me. The strain was immense, sleep became a luxury, and food tasted like ash. But I needed more than a collection of anomalies. I needed concrete, undeniable proof. I couldn't go to my handler with just a gut feeling and a story about coffee and parking spots. He would tell me the pressure was getting to me, that I was becoming paranoid. So I decided to set up a simple test, a classic counterintelligence move designed to flush out a leak. I would plant 3 different pieces of carefully crafted bait, false intelligence, and see which one got taken. The perfect opportunity arose during a temporary shift rotation. For a week, I was assigned to partner with 2 other officers on different blocks, giving me the separation from Miller I needed. To the first officer, a grizzled veteran named Rossi, I casually mentioned a fabricated rumor during a shared lunch break. I told him I'd heard whispers from a contact in the regional office that the Bureau was planning a major, unannounced shakedown of C-Block, a tactical raid specifically looking for a recent influx of burner phones. To the second officer, a younger, more ambitious guard named Jenkins, I let it slip that my source had said the true target was actually B-Block, and the focus wasn't phones, but a new, potent synthetic drug that was causing a spike in overdoses. To Miller, my prime suspect, I gave the juiciest, most specific piece of bait. During a quiet moment when we were briefly reassigned to the main guard tower overlooking the entire prison, I confided in him, pitching my voice low and conspiratorial. "Hey, you're not gonna believe this," I started, leaning in as if sharing a sacred secret. "My old captain from the state pen, the one I told you about? He called me last night. Strictly unofficial, off the books. Said they've got solid intel that a major shipment is coming in. Not drugs this time. Clean, bundled cash. For a huge, prison-wide gambling payout on the upcoming Pro Football Championship. They think it's being held by the Aryan Brotherhood guys in A Block. Said the feds are planning to send in a tactical team to raid for it on Thursday morning." It was the perfect lie. It was highly specific, it involved a high-value commodity, it named a powerful and well-organized prison gang, and most importantly, it had a ticking clock, a timeline. I had meticulously baited the hook with Miller's favorite lure, valuable, actionable information. Now, all I had to do was wait and watch. The next 2 days were the longest, most tension-filled of my life. On Wednesday, the day before my phantom raid was scheduled to occur, I saw it. I had maneuvered my post assignment to give me a clear view of the A Block yard. Miller was stationed at the entrance, checking inmates as they went to and from their afternoon meal. I watched him from 100 yards away, my binoculars pressed so hard against my face they left indentations. I saw him talking to a known shot caller for the Aryan Brotherhood, a hulking brute with a swastika tattooed on his neck. The conversation looked brief, utterly casual, the kind of routine interaction an officer has 100 times a day. But then, as the inmate turned to leave, Miller did something I had never once seen him do in 3 months of observation. He subtly, almost invisibly, reached up and touched his left earlobe with his thumb and forefinger. It was a fleeting, minuscule gesture, but the shot caller, who was walking away, saw it. He gave an almost imperceptible nod and quickened his pace. It was a signal. Less than an hour later, the entire atmosphere in A Block shifted palpably. The usual cacophony of noise dropped to a tense, busy hum. Inmates, who were usually lounging or exercising, were now clustered in hushed, anxious groups. There was a flurry of coordinated activity, a sense of urgent purpose. They were cleaning house. They were moving something. My bait had been taken. Miller hadn't just heard the lie. He had passed it directly to the target. That was the precise moment my gut-wrenching suspicion hardened into cold, terrifying certainty. My partner, my lifeline, was corrupt. He was dirty. But the implications were bigger, more horrifying than I had initially thought. The coordinated laughter on D Block. It wasn't just because the inmates had somehow discovered I was a Fed. It was because Miller had told them. He hadn't just failed to protect his partner's cover. He had actively, deliberately sold me out to the most dangerous men in the facility. But why? The usual motives for such a profound betrayal are greed, coercion, or blackmail. Miller, with his confident, commanding presence, didn't seem like the type of man who could be easily coerced or blackmailed. That left greed. But selling out a federal agent is a death sentence for your career and potentially your life. No one takes that kind of catastrophic risk for a few $100s scraped from the prison economy. Miller had to be in deep. He wasn't just a dirty cog in the contraband machine. He was a key player, a manager, maybe even a director. The laughter now made perfect, terrifying sense. It was a multi-layered act of psychological warfare. By outing me to the inmates, Miller was demonstrating his power, proving his value to his criminal partners by showing them he had inside information from the highest levels. Simultaneously, he was painting a massive, blinking target on my back. If I had a sudden, fatal accident in the yard, who would question it? An undercover agent discovered by vengeful inmates? His life expectancy is measured in hours, not days. The laughter was a strategic move, designed to unnerve me, to make me sloppy with fear, to let me know in no uncertain terms that my time was running out. The game had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the hunter stalking his prey through the prison's concrete jungle. I was the prey, and the hunter knew my every thought. I could feel Miller watching me now, his casual questions. "How you holding up, Carter? You seem a little on edge lately." No longer friendly inquiries, but laced with a chilling, predatory intent. He was playing with me, like a cat batting at a cornered, wounded mouse before delivering the final bite. I had the proof I needed, but I was in an impossible, perilous position. I couldn't go to the warden. For all I knew, the corruption went all the way to the top. The instant I broke my cover to anyone at Blackwood, my life would be worthless. If Miller even suspected that I had made him, that I knew his secret, he would have me removed from the board. Permanently. My new plan was born of desperation, and it was lethally dangerous. I had to get closer to Miller, not pull away. I had to lean into the skid. I had to make him think that I wasn't an incorruptible Fed, but a potential recruit. I began a subtle campaign, dropping hints of my own disillusionment. I started to complain openly about the low pay, the long hours, the thankless nature of the job. "You know, for what we go through in here, this job barely pays the bills," I'd say with a sigh during a quiet moment. "Sometimes I stand here and look at the guys on the other side of the bars and wonder if we're on the wrong side of the business." I was dangling a new kind of bait, a false, corruptible version of myself. I was projecting the image of a decent cop being slowly ground down by the system, becoming cynical, becoming greedy, becoming ripe for the picking. I was attempting to turn his own trap against him, to get him to not just expose his operation, but to invite me inside it. The moment came one evening when Miller and I were the last two people in the staff locker room. The air was heavy, silent save for the drip of a leaky showerhead. "You know, Carter," he said, his voice low and measured, his back to me as he slowly changed out of his uniform. "You're a good CO. You get it. You understand the balance. But being good doesn't pay for a boat, and it sure as hell doesn't pay for a kid's college education." He paused, turning to look at me, his eyes searching mine intently. "There are other ways to make this job worthwhile. Lucrative ways. You just have to be smart about it. You have to be on the right team." He was opening the door. He was extending an invitation into his dark, treacherous world. It was exactly what I had been working towards, the breakthrough I so desperately needed. But as I looked into his cold, calculating eyes, devoid of the usual friendly warmth, I knew with absolute certainty that stepping through that door meant there was no turning back, no exit, only a path that led deeper into the heart of the conspiracy. The invitation hung in the thick, humid air of the locker room, a proposition built on betrayal and brimming with a perilous opportunity. My response had to be perfect, a finely tuned performance of greed, caution, and just enough moral weakness to be utterly believable. "I don't know, Miller," I said, shaking my head slowly, letting my gaze drift to the floor as if wrestling with a profound internal conflict. "That's a risky game. A real risky game. We see what happens to the guys who get caught. They end up on the other side of the bars, and they don't last long. Getting caught is for amateurs," he scoffed, the sound dripping with a chilling, absolute confidence. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's about being smart. It's about control. We're in charge here, Carter. We decide what comes in and what goes out. We set the price. It's the best-run business in the entire state. High demand, no competition, and a captive market." He smirked, a cruel, self-satisfied expression. Literally. That was my in. That was the key turning in the lock. Over the next 2 weeks, Miller slowly, cautiously, began to bring me into a world even more sophisticated and extensive than I had dared to imagine. He wasn't just a corrupt guard. He was a logistics manager for a consortium of the prison's most powerful gangs, a central hub that served them all. He used his authority as a senior officer to create deliberate blind spots in patrol schedules and manipulate camera coverage to facilitate contraband drops between blocks. He falsified maintenance logs and work orders to get trusted inmate runners into supposedly secure areas like administration and supply warehouses. He started me off with small, seemingly insignificant tests. He instructed me to forget to log a bundle of cigarettes found during a cell toss. He had me accidentally leave a utility closet on the 3rd tier unlocked for a 10-minute window. Each time, I complied, playing the part of the nervous but willing apprentice. And each time, I documented everything in the vast, private ledger of my mind. Dates, times, inmate names, types of contraband, and Miller's specific instructions. I was building a case from the inside out, brick by treacherous brick. The final, critical piece of the puzzle was figuring out how the most valuable goods got past the front gate, the most secure checkpoint in the entire facility. That level of breach required an access and a nerve that even a dirty CO shouldn't possess. I found my answer during what Miller ominously called my final exam. He wanted me to be the one to bring in a package. A small, vacuum-sealed box. "It's a big one, Carter," he said, his eyes gleaming with a feverish avarice. "A dozen top-of-the-line, brand-new smartphones. Worth at least 50 grand on the inside market. Our cut is 10. 5 for you. Your first big score." He clapped me on the shoulder. "All you have to do is get it from the parking lot to the laundry room during shift change. I'll handle the rest." This was it. The final test of loyalty. The act of personally smuggling high-value contraband into a federal prison. It was a line I had never wanted to cross, a felony that could end my career and land me in a cell myself. But it was the only way to get him, to capture the entire conspiracy on a platter. The exchange was set for 7 p.m. at the start of our night shift. A car, he explained, would pull into the staff lot, and the driver would leave the package under the front tire of my truck. I was to retrieve it, conceal it within a specially modified thermos with a false bottom, and simply walk it in through the staff entrance. My handler and I had been preparing for this possibility for weeks. The moment Miller laid out the plan, I excused myself to the restroom and sent a single, coded text from a burner phone: "The delivery is scheduled." That night, the sprawling, dimly lit prison parking lot was crawling with invisible eyes and ears. A federal surveillance team, disguised in civilian vehicles, was in place, ready to document every move. As I walked across the asphalt toward my truck, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The cool night air felt electric on my skin. The package was there, a small, dense brick wrapped in black plastic, tucked neatly against the rubber of the tire. I bent down, my hand surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, and picked it up. With my back to the prison, I unscrewed the bottom of the thermos, transferred the sleek, cold phones into the hidden compartment, and sealed it shut. That walk from my truck to the staff entrance felt like a mile-long journey across a minefield. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant sound was a potential alarm. Miller was waiting just inside the door, exactly as he said he would be. His smile was wide, triumphant, predatory. "See," he whispered, his voice flush with victory as he reached for the thermos. "Easy as pie." But I didn't give it to him. I held it tight. "Not so fast, Miller," I said. The hesitant, uncertain tone of Officer Carter, the character I had inhabited for 3 months, was gone. It was replaced by the flat, cold, and unfamiliar voice of a federal agent about to spring a trap of his own. "There's been a change of plans." Confusion flickered across his face, a brief, disbelieving flash, quickly followed by the dawning, sickening horror of realization. He looked away from the thermos and stared directly into my eyes, and for the first time, he finally saw it. The mask was off. His mask and mine. He wasn't looking at his new, corrupt partner in crime. He was looking at the man who had just systematically destroyed his entire world. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his bravado evaporating into thin, panicked air. "I'm talking about 18 U.S.C. 1346, honest services fraud," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the concrete floor. "I'm talking about conspiracy to distribute narcotics and controlled items in a federal facility. Mostly, I'm talking about the last 3 months I've spent documenting every single criminal move you've made." Sheer, animal panic flared in his eyes. He took a clumsy step back, his gaze darting left and right, looking for an escape route that wasn't there. He was trapped. Just then, as if on cue, the secondary door to the control room burst open. Captain Davis, his face a mask of grim fury, stormed in, flanked by 2 imposing agents in full tactical gear, their weapons held at a low ready. Miller's face went corpse white. "David Miller," Captain Davis said, his voice like the cracking of stone, resonating with years of betrayal. "You're under arrest." Miller looked from the armed agents to the cuffs in Davis's hand, and then his eyes locked onto mine. His face was a storm of disbelief, wounded pride, and a pure, unadulterated hatred that was more potent than any physical threat. He didn't say a word as they forced his hands behind his back and the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut. He just stared at me. That final look was a silent, venomous promise, more threatening than any weapon. The aftermath was as clean and efficient as a surgical procedure. With my detailed testimony and the mountain of corroborating evidence gathered by the surveillance teams, Miller's entire network collapsed like a house of cards. Several other staff members, including 2 guards and a kitchen supervisor, were implicated and promptly arrested. My cover was, of course, permanently blown, and my time as Officer Carter was officially over. The warden debriefed me personally, his face a painful, weary mix of profound gratitude and the deep, abiding shame of a captain whose ship had been corrupted from within. But when I finally walked out of Blackwood's monstrous gates for the last time, stepping out of its shadow and into the bright, indifferent sunlight, I didn't feel the surge of triumph I had expected. There was no elation, no sense of victory. Instead, a deep and unsettling disquiet settled over me. I had won. The mission was a success. The traitor was exposed, the network dismantled. But I couldn't get one thing out of my head. The laughter. It wasn't just Miller's closest inmate associates who had laughed that night. It was the whole block. Silas, Rico, and 24 other hardened criminals, laughing in perfect, chilling unison. Miller had given them my secret, yes, but they were the ones who had savored it, who had weaponized it, who had thrown it in my face like a fistful of dirt. We had found and surgically removed Miller, the cancerous tumor. But the prison itself, the insidious culture of secrets, violence, and corruption, felt like a systemic disease that was still festering, still spreading in the dark. I had exposed the traitor, but the sound of that laughter still echoes in my mind on quiet nights. It's a chilling reminder that for every dirty cop you catch, there are 100 inmates playing a longer, deeper, and more patient game. Miller was just one move on an endless chessboard. And as I drove away from Blackwood, watching its grim silhouette shrink in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that I hadn't truly won anything at all. I had just survived a single, brutal round.